Light squid, I needed the money, so I took the squid fishing job. Things were tight back home in the northeast, and the prospect of a sizable reward following 2 years at sea seemed like a way out. I wanted to make an impression on my girlfriend and possibly start a serious relationship. I was persuaded to do it by my friend QUI. He was constantly looking for quick money to make up for his mistakes. We completed the paperwork quickly, attended several days of safety lectures, and learned the fundamentals of navigating. Before I knew it, the chilly wind was already stinging my ears as I stood on the deck of the Lurungu, a trawler out of Shandong. Captain Lee was a towering man with a short fuse. As we loaded up, he barked commands. Drums of oil, cartons of noodles, frozen meat, rice sacks, and those bright lamps used to entice squid from the depths. I thought the ocean would grow lonely, so I took extra cigarettes and fast food. With firecrackers popping around the pier and reverberating across the port walls, we shoved off in late December. The team was a diverse group. There were officers from Dalian who behaved as like they controlled the ship, a couple from my province, and some from Inner Mongolia who spoke their own dialect and kept together. There were 33 of us squeezed into bunks that smelled of perspiration, salt, and iron. The initial weeks were terrible. I puked until I had nothing more to say, and the water continued to roll. The roar of the engine and the sound of the waves obscured the night. I dreamed of what we would buy when we returned while playing low-stakes cards with QUI and a few other people while I wasn't unwell. QUI lost a little and said he would reimburse me later. This tiny guy from Heilongjiang, Lej, was constantly smoking. Under his bunk, he had entire stacks of crates. He would murmur through the smoke, "This work's miserable, but at least I control the cigarettes." The hard job started when we arrived at the fishing grounds off Peru in February. Jigging was done on nights. We would wait for the squid to attack the lowering long lines that were baited with hooks and flooding the water with those lamps until it gleamed like liquid daylight. When they did, 10-pound corpses flailed, spewing ink and seawater, and the pole almost severed your arms. Our backs screamed as we hauled. The best was Lou, calm, quick, and methodical. He could earn thousands of pounds every night with no complaints. The worst part was unloading to the purchasing ships. We would stack ice trays in the hold until our fingers went numb for a day or two without getting any sleep, shouting till his throat turned into a horse. The captain pushed hard. However, the murmurs began. The salary didn't stack up. The contracts didn't seem right. Blurry signatures and fake stamps. Guys began claiming that we had been duped. The loudest was Lou. He commented, "We're slaving for nothing," while stirring noodles in the mess one evening. "The company's robbing us blind." I nodded, but said nothing. Kui dismissed it with a giggle, stated that we would take care of it when we returned. Beneath the floorboards, tension simmered like rot. An elderly man who enjoyed drinking and bragging, Shia, the chef, chose fights and sided with the captain. He cursed at Jiang, a younger deckhand, one evening. "You think you're better than us?" yelled Jiang. He yanked out a knife. The captain barged in, knocked him down with a punch, forced him to kneel, and apologized. "Too much drink," Jiang whispered. Calm but forceful, Lou spoke up. "Captain, calm down." Lee gave a scowl and turned to leave, but Lou then struck up a quiet conversation with a few males. Huang, a young Mongolian child, bowed among other members of the same group. While repairing lines, I heard fragments of it. Lou once said, "We make it happen. If we want to go home." By June, the atmosphere off the Chilean coast had changed. Heavy. Lou stopped by as I was out on deck beneath the lights that evening. "We're taking the ship tonight," he remarked after picking up my squid knife and testing its blade. "Come along with us." He had unwavering, steady gaze. I gave a headshake. "Not me." He claimed that the non-joiners will be placed on rafts. "Make a rescue call." Then he took my knife and left. On the line, my hands shook. I wanted to alert the captain, but the deck felt like it was being watched, and the officers were asleep. After a few minutes, I heard screaming followed by shouting. The engine sent forth a roar. Cook Shear hurried over, brandishing a knife. He yelled, "What are you doing?" More yelling was followed by quiet. There was blood on the deck when I returned later. I knew better than to believe what they said about Shia falling overboard. The bridge was taken over by the mutineers, Lu, Jiang, Bao, Huang, and a few more. They made Captain Li steer for China, shackled the lifeboats, unlocked the armaments. It remained peaceful for weeks. The lads joked that we would return home soon as we traveled over the Pacific. Kui said, "Say Shia slipped in a wave." However, Lu became increasingly suspicious. He claimed that the engines were failing, the gasoline was running low, and there were reports circulating that the engineers were planning to return the ship. Then July arrived. I was smoking in my berth one night west of Hawaii when Lu came calling names down the hallway. "I need assistance on deck. Lu Gang went after you." Screams and splashes after a few minutes. Everything was obscured by loud music coming from the helm. I froze, gazing up at the ceiling. Then I heard footsteps. Bleeding, the second cop staggered in, with a knife in hand. Lu trailed behind. He asked, "Why are you on the floor?" Before stabbing him once again. "Stand up." One more blow. With blood on his clothes, he turned to face me. He said, "You didn't join at first, however. You are my brother. You're secure." I gave a nod, until he was gone. I didn't breathe. They killed 9 persons that evening. The second officer, engineers Wendo, and his cousin Yuelu Gang, Jiang, Shua, Chen, and even Bo. Every mutineer was required to participate. They removed the bodies one by one, and threw them over the edge. The terrace had been thoroughly cleaned by morning. I prepared breakfast, as if nothing had happened. The air had an iron and bleach odor. Ku made an effort to console me. "We're all right. They refused to come into contact with us. Soon, we will return home." However, I could see his hands trembling. Men silently vanished over the ensuing days. One morning, Ma vanished without a trace. He leapt. He was my spy, according to Lu. There's no cause to murder him. Nobody took it seriously. Lu was no longer asleep. During meals, he forced the captain to sit next to him. He watched me cook and examined every dish for poison. He had bloodshot eyes, constantly scanning. Then he veered off course once more, said we would travel to Japan, fabricate documents, and request money from home. He forced each of us to call our families, claim to be ill, and request 5,000 yuan. They sent what they could. Nobody trusted anyone by the end. Whispers about toppling Lu began to circulate among Bao and his Mongolian men. Hang informed him. Lu made the captain his ally that evening. He told him, "You've killed 2. You are now one of us." He compiled a list of names. Kui enticed Bao to the deck at first light, told Lu that she wanted to speak. Kui lunged for the chest, but the captain stabbed him from behind when he stood up. Although Lu's men were waiting below, Bao cried out for his crew. Every Mongolian was called by name. Bao, Dai, Shaw, and Chu. They all disappeared into the shadows. Their bunks were deserted by dawn. There were 11 of us remaining. In one way or another, everyone is now a killer. Lu forced the tail on us. The Mongolians are to blame. Let's say they escaped aboard a raft. If we told our families otherwise, he threatened to harm them. The engines were failing by August. We drifted until we were noticed by the Japan Coast Guard. They made calls, numbered the crew, and towed us in. We told the falsehood when Chinese police arrived, but it was unsuccessful. The challengers arrived quickly. Jiang and Lu were killed. I was given 4 years. Even though I served them gently, I can still hear the splashes when I close my eyes. In the shadows, I can make out Lu smile. Body after body is being swallowed by the ocean. 22 men have left, and for some reason, I'm still floating. Guilt tides. I loved fishing as much as my mother did. My grandfather taught us both how to read the tide, tie knots, and use bait hooks. She was always the watchful one, making sure I hadn't forgotten the life jackets, bringing extra snacks, and double-checking the weather. I was more possibly overconfident. I saw her staring out at the horizon that night as we loaded the boat at the harbor. The sky is already bleeding purple. "Are you sure about going out so far tonight?" she inquired. Although she spoke calmly, there was a hint of edge in her voice that I had learned to pay attention to. I smiled and said, "It'll be fine, Mom," as I fastened the final strap. The water is serene. This time of year, the big tuna are in block canyons, and we have all the necessary equipment. After pausing to trace the darker sea with her eyes, she sighed and boarded. Around 11, I started the engine, and we gradually moved away from the dock, leaving the harbor's orange glow in our wake. The boat, a strong 31-footer that I had spent months refurbishing, was my pride. I made a few adjustments that afternoon, including patching up some worn areas on the transom and removing the outdated trim tabs that weren't accomplishing much. While snacking on chips, a man at the pier had observed me drilling out the bolts. "Hey, are you certain that's clever? That way, the boat could take on water," he had stated. I had dismissed it with a laugh. "She's sturdy. Don't be concerned about it." Mom was unaware of the changes. She put her trust in me to handle the mechanics. She settled inside the car with her thermos as we drove away, the aroma of her coffee permeating the air. "Tell me once more why we aren't simply remaining nearer to the island." I smiled and answered, "Because the big ones aren't close to the island. We'll catch something noteworthy." At around 1 in the morning, we dropped our lines close to Block Island. The air was calm and cool, and the sea was glassy. As a tiny striper flicked water on her sleeve, Mom sucked it in and laughed softly. "All right," she grinned. I wasn't happy, but this isn't all that horrible. "Let's drive a few more miles to the canyon." She scowled. "Tomorrow is my work day. I am essential to those children." I said it would be quick, and she gave in as usual. The night grew more desolate the farther we traveled. The engine's hum and the wave's steady slap were the only sounds left once the last of the beach lights disappeared behind us. I made 1 or 2 checks of the bilge pump. It was operating smoothly. Just before daybreak, we arrived in the canyon. Here, the water was heavy and dark, hundreds of feet below us. We cast our lines and used squid as bait for our hooks. With her hair capturing the gold light, Mom silently observed the morning. She whispered, "This is peaceful, but swear to me, we'll return soon." "I swear," I said. My line then jerked violently. "Do you have one?" I braced myself and shouted. However, a heavy grinding sound came from the stern before I could reel. Metal on metal. Mom turned, her eyes wide. "What was that?" I froze as I ran to check. The transom was allowing water to leak in, first slowly and then more quickly. I tried to sound cool as I said, "Mom, something's wrong with the BGE." Although the pump was operating, it was not keeping up. Her voice stiffened as the deck felt spongy, where I had previously patched it, and soft beneath my boots. "Can you fix it?" "I don't know." I struggled to find tools, but the flow was too powerful. "Grab the ditch bags," I instructed her. Now, the water quickly rose, swirling first around our ankles and then our knees. "We're sinking," she exclaimed. I screamed, "Get the life raft ready," while reaching for the radio. Static hissed. I gave it another go. Nothing. The boat lurched violently to one side. "Hold on." Her hands were shaking as she reeled in the final line. The deck violently tilted in the following second. The bow fell under before I could even yell. It was an instant plunge. We were completely engulfed by the water. The cold knocked the air out of my lungs like a wall of blades. I came to, coughing and with salt-stinging eyes. The boat has vanished. Only rubble and the sound of air escaping from below. I yelled, "Mom," as a life raft inflated nearby, and there was a flash of orange. I dragged one of the ditch bags behind me as I kicked hard in its direction. It hurt to climb in. My limbs had a lead-like feel. I pivoted, looking over the sea. "Mom, where are you?" No answer, just the empty roll of the sea. "Mom." I let out a scream until my throat was sore. I let out a whistle. 3 repeated. Brief explosions. Just water and wind. Had she fallen and struck her head? The idea made my stomach turn. It was hopeless as I leaned over the side to look into the Black Sea. Debris was already being carried away by the stream. Hours went by, bright and ruthless. The sun rose. What little we had, I rationed. A hand pump for desalination, a few water packets, and a few energy snacks. Salt caused my lips to split. Gripping the raft ropes caused my hands to burn. I looked at the horizon every few minutes. I once spotted a ship, a far-off speck, but my flares were ineffective against the light. I was plagued with guilt. Why hadn't I paid attention to her? Why had I pushed out so far? Her voice was still audible to me. "Are you certain you want to go out tonight?" The ocean felt alive on the second night. Out there, everything changed. Splashes in the shadows. Faint shapes that vanished as I gave them a direct glance. Whispering prayers I hardly remembered. I gripped the knife from the emergency pack. Dreams of her calling from beneath the waves interrupted the remnants of sleep. Days became hazy. My thoughts wandered and my skin cracked. I almost thought she was still around when I spoke to her voice in the breeze. The storm then arrived. The raft was spinning like a leaf in sheets of rain. I cried out for anything, help, forgiveness, anything. The horizon was shattered by lightning, revealing nothing but limitless sea. I saw it on the 8th day. A huge freight ship. With my arm shaking so much that I almost dropped the emergency flag, I waved it. From the deck, someone yelled. A life ring fell into the ocean. With my muscles burning, I swam in its direction. I was pulled aboard by hands that seized mine. A crewman gave me water, while I sat shivering under a blanket. "Your mother?" he softly inquired. I gave a head shake. Suddenly, I started crying. "She's gone." I was already aware when they called the Coast Guard. She had been claimed by the water. Even now that I'm back on firm ground, I can still hear the ocean pouring in and her voice receding beneath the waves when I wake up. She was detained that night by the water, which has its own secrets. Night by the water, which has its own secrets, was approaching. I noticed him clearly for the first time when the hallway door opened. The same man from the lake, short and sturdy, with a beard, glasses, and a black flannel shirt. He had an in his right hand. The water in red. That evening after work, I made the decision to go to the little lake behind my former family home. It had been a terrible week at the warehouse. Sore shoulders, long hours, and the kind of fatigue that erodes your patience. The one activity that consistently gave me a sense of renewal was fishing. A small dirt path that meandered among the pines led to the lake, which was concealed well behind the treeline. It was exactly how I loved it. No signs, no trails on any map. I used to go there with my dad to cast lines when I was younger, but these days I typically went by myself. I agreed to return before 10 o'clock, and my wife stayed at home with the kids. I drove the pickup to the edge of the woods after grabbing my rod, a tiny tackle box, and the lantern. The horizon was already covered in orange and fading violet streaks as the sun had already set. It took about 15 minutes for the walk-in. Every step released the scent of moist pine and moss, and the ground was soft from last night's rain. A few frogs croaked from somewhere near the pond, and crickets shrieked from the undergrowth. When I arrived at the lake, everything was just as I had remembered it. It was still completely black and surrounded by trees that were so dense that they obscured the remainder of the daylight. The air was chilly and nearly motionless. I used a fat worm as bait and set up on a level rock that I had used since I was a child. There were ripples on the glassy surface as the cast landed with a gentle plunk. It was quiet for a time. A fish pulled once or twice, but nothing significant happened. That was okay with me. Tonight, it wasn't about the catch. Then I saw motion on the lake's far side. I initially thought it might be a raccoon scuttling along the shore or a deer drinking. However, as my eyes adjusted, I saw that it was a man, hunched over something metallic. He stood knee-deep in the shallows. I could see it plainly after a short while. A big metal drum. He tipped it forward, releasing a thick jet of liquid that made a low, gurgling sound as it hit the water. The remainder of the light was captured by the color, dark, reddish tinted, and nearly black. Paint, oil, or something worse. Sharp and metallic. The scent drifted across the lake. "Hey, what are you doing over there?" I yelled, cupping my hands about my mouth. In mid-step, the figure froze. He turned his head slowly in my direction. Even though I couldn't see his face, I could feel the weight and coldness of his gaze. He straightened up, picked up the drum, and walked silently out of the lake into the trees after a beat. My heartbeat quickened. If it was nothing, why run? I continued to stand there for a minute, looking at the other beach, but the dusk had turned into complete darkness. After bobbing once, my fishing line became motionless. I quickly arrived, gathered my belongings, and slung the rod over my shoulder. I heard a branch snap off to my left halfway back to the truck. I came to a halt. My flashlight's beam passed across soaking leaves and tangled underbrush. Nothing changed. Is anyone present? In the silence, my voice seemed loud. Just my breathing and the cricket's applause. No response. I began to move more quickly. Then, this time, there was another crack behind me. With light piercing the darkness, I whirled around. I briefly believed I saw movement, something sneaking behind a tree. My stomach turned. With my keys in hand, I jogged the remaining distance. My hands were shaking by the time I slammed the truck door shut. With my headlights carving a white tunnel through the forest road, I shut the doors. Until I was back on the paved highway, I continued. My wife was cleaning up after supper at home. I tried to appear casual and kept my voice light as I told her what I had witnessed. Probably some idiot dumping waste, I said. I'll call the environmental people tomorrow. She put down her dish towel and scowled. But that's not typical. Are you certain it wasn't something else? Yes, I replied, even though my mind was still burning with the sight of that red liquid. It's all right. I'm all right. We had a late meal. Upstairs, the children had already fallen asleep. I was lying up at midnight, repeatedly reliving the scenario. The scarlet that wasn't quite red, the way he'd twisted, and his immobility. I shuddered at the prospect. What if it wasn't paint? Then there was a knock on the door. 3 deliberate, slow thuds. Beside me, my wife stirred. This late? Who could that be? She muttered. I reached for my phone, checked for missed calls, and put on jeans. There was another knock from the side window next to the kitchen, but it was softer this time. In the dim light of the porch, I slipped downstairs. I looked through the curtain. Nothing. Then a quiet, deep voice drifted through the glass. Pardon me. I believe you saw me earlier at the lake. I just want to clarify who I am. My blood chilled. How on earth was he aware of my residence? Who are you? I yelled. How did you come across me? No response. Then, sir, I can explain everything if you simply open the door. It won't be long. Halfway down the stairs, my pale, wide-eyed wife arrived. She mouthed, Don't, I yelled louder, pausing. Leave now, or I'm calling the police. Then the sound of footfall crunching on dirt faded in the direction of the road. I reported it. The dispatcher promised to send a patrol to be sure. Every creak in the house made my heart skip a beat while we waited upstairs with the lights on. After arriving, the officers conducted a brief search and reported finding nothing. Probably some prank, one of them remarked. Lock up tight. I made an effort to accept that. I did, in fact. However, glass broke downstairs at roughly 2 in the morning. My wife let out a scream. I leapt to my feet and snatched the bat from beneath the bed. Stay here, I said to her. Call 911. With bare feet on the chilly floor, I tiptoed down. The window in the kitchen was broken. The curtain was blowing in the wind. There were creaking footsteps on the stairs. Go slowly and steadily. The knife caught the dim light of the hallway. You shouldn't have yelled at me, he muttered. Now I have to make sure you don't tell anyone. I gripped the bat more tightly. I snarled, get out. For that, it's too late. My wife's voice rang out from upstairs. The police are on their way. He paused, listening with a small tilt of his head. In the distance, sirens wailed softly. He then made a leap. I made a forceful swing. There was a painful crack when the bat made contact with his arm. He let go of the knife, but slammed into me, sending us both falling against the wall. We had trouble. Broken glass, picture frames striking the ground, grunts. I really need him. Pushed him back in the direction of the window. He growled and staggered. It's not over yet. Then he cut his palm open on the glass as he leapt through the shattered frame. His footsteps disappeared into the shadows. A few minutes later, the police showed up. They discovered a trail that led into the woods and blood on the sill. I told them all about the crimson liquid, the drum, and the lake. They discovered further tire marks close to the distant coast the following day. There was a partial boot print in the dirt that matched one from my kitchen floor, but there was no drum or containers. 2 days later, the blood sample was returned. Robert Clean was a local butcher who resided 2 towns away and had previously been charged with assault. He said he had simply been disposing of animal feces when they discovered him hidden in a shed. However, the knife that was found on my kitchen floor revealed a different tale. It contained traces of both fresh and old animal and human blood. The inquiry grew in scope. Unclaimed remains, lost dogs, and an unsolved hiker disappearance that occurred years earlier close to the same lake. He accepted a 15-year plea agreement. At the hearing, I gave a statement. He simply grinned and remarked, "You saw too much," when I asked him why he was pursuing me. Soon after, we sold the family land. I no longer go fishing by myself. Not at night. I still think I hear that quiet gurgling of liquid striking water sometimes when the wind is just perfect, and I wonder if he was indeed working alone. The lake is still there, calm and undiscovered. However, all secrets eventually come to light. The final cast under the hum of fluorescent lights. Life seemed to be passing by. Therefore, it sounded ideal when Chris proposed riding a bike across the nation and stopping at rivers to go fishing. There are no deadlines, tranquil water, and open roads. It had been years since I had experienced such enthusiasm. We left Portland in June 1977 with 2 bikes, a tent, and a few rods fastened to our bodies. We rode our bikes across Oregon's back roads 4 days, passing pine-covered hills, wheat, fields glistening in the breeze, and deserted rest areas that smelled of rain and dust. Our legs were shot by the time we arrived to a tiny state park nestled along a meandering river. However, we were revitalized by the sight of the sea. The river curved around boulders and had deep pools where trout might rest. It was swift and clear. We unpacked next to the bank after locking our bikes to a cedar. Chris, who was generally upbeat, aimed his rod at the water. He said, "They say this river is full of fish. We're having fresh food tonight." I chuckled as I threaded a fly through my line. "Before it becomes dark, let's move quickly." It was peaceful for the first hour. The scent of cedar and damp moss filled the air. Over the shallows, fireflies hovered. Chris captured a tiny, slippery, silver fish that was struggling with all of its might. He held it up for me to see, smiled like a child, and then let it go. However, something changed when night fell. The woods became strangely quiet. A twig broke somewhere behind us. Next, I shone my flashlight toward the trees. Just shadows, trees, and the slight rustle of leaves. I muttered that it was probably a deer. Chris paused, or another person fishing. "Hi there, quiet." We ignored it and continued casting. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that I was being watched, even though neither of us spoke much after that. It was more than nerves. There was something out there. The kind of silence that causes your heartbeat to sound excessively loud. We packed up and crawled under the tent after the bite stopped. Chris reclined on his sleeping bag. He zipped the zipper tight and added, "Good call on this spot. Calm, with no crowds." "Yes, it's too calm," I said. He chuckled quietly, and before long, we were discussing routes and the next stretch south. However, sleep began to creep in as our voices faded. The darkness broke open at that point. Somewhere, nearby, a loud, gruff, and enraged engine roared to life. Under tires, gravel whirled. The sound intensified quickly, getting closer until spotlights passed over our tent's thin canvas. "What the hell?" Chris sat up, but the truck rushed ahead before he could react. We were crushed flat by the impact. The world turned into cacophony, bones breaking, metal and canvas tearing. My chest gave way. My breath left me. I thought I yelled, but the roar of the engine drowned it away. The truck crashed into us once more after reversing with its tires spraying dirt. All that was audible when it stopped was the engine cooling ticking. Then a door opened with a squeak. Slow, methodical footsteps came closer. I saw him through ripped cloth, a man with broad shoulders, a low cap, and a silhouette in the stars. Something glinted in his hand, a long-handled axe with the slightest gloss on its edge. Chris gasped next to me. "Please." "Don't, please." The man remained silent. He lifted the axe and lowered it, twice, once. It sounded like a wood splitting thick and final. Chris shouted and thrashed. The man hit again, each blow vicious and purposeful. "Stop," I yelled as I pulled myself up and reached for him. My ribs were ripped apart by pain. The axe swung in my direction. He swung and grabbed my arm. My eyes was filled with white-hot anguish. I felt the bone break. The next swing brushed my side as I rolled, gasping. My hand struck glass and muck. I screamed for aid, but it didn't come, and I kicked weakly. He was breathing heavily as he stood over me. I briefly believed he was finished. After wiping the blade off his jeans, he turned and headed back to his truck. The door banged shut. The engine began to run. He drove away slowly, seemingly content. There was silence. The air was heavy with the stench of blood and gasoline. "Chris," I muttered. "Hey, come on." No response. I put my hand on his shoulder. Warm as ever. Nothing to move. Something broke inside of me. Something deeper, not simply ribs. I dragged myself toward the road's dim shimmer as I crawled away from the wreckage. My limbs had lost their sense of reality. Only suffering, filth, and survival. My face and hands were ripped apart by thorns. The park appeared to go on forever. Finally, there was the sound of tires hissing. The headlights grew. With a feeble wave, I staggered into the beam. A vehicle screeched to a halt. "Oh my God! Attacked!" a woman's voice exclaimed. I croaked. My friend's still back there. The man who drove her sprinted in the direction of the campsite. Minutes were hazy. Chris was pale and covered in blood when they returned with him. The man barely muttered, "He's alive." Then came sirens, the kind you hear in nightmares. Lights flashing, paramedics yelling. I recall a mask, a needle, hands on me, and then darkness. Days had gone by when I woke up in the hospital. My ribs were restrained by tubes that ran from my chest, and my arm was in a cast. Chris was in the adjacent room. They claimed that although he survived, he had partial memory loss, cerebral impairment, and an eye loss. He didn't say much. The police arrived with notebooks and inquiries. I reported what I observed to them, the truck, the man's form, and the sound of his voice even though I couldn't understand what he was saying. They discovered the blood, the ripped tent, and the tire traces, but no weapon, no prints, and no suspect. I returned years later. I was unable to stop it. Not much had changed in the town. The same gas station and diner. One name kept coming up in the police files. An aggressive ranch hand from the area. Each time, the assault charges were withdrawn. I once seen him going across Main Street. I froze. His countenance. It was the one from the shadows that I remembered. Cool and unconcerned. The statute of limitations had long since passed. There was nothing that anyone could do. Soon after, Chris and I drifted away. Certain wounds heal incorrectly, while others never do. On some evenings, I still wake up to the sound of that engine running in the dark and the headlights piercing the canvas. Since then, I haven't gone fishing. The river now feels cursed, as if it still remembers everything.